early decision application lightly because there are a lot of pros and cons to applying early decision. One of the pros to applying early decision is if you look at a college's numbers, the early decision acceptance rate is usually higher than early action or regular decision for that matter. The reason being, if you look at the early decision process, it actually works in the college's favor. Because if you are saying to them, I'm going to come, all you have to do is offer me admission, it's something that they covet because the way they look at it is when colleges send out admissions offers, right? So let's just say they're looking to fill a class of 1,000 kids. And if they put out 2,500 acceptances, they're hoping to build a class of 1,000 from that 2,500. These numbers, which they manage very closely, it's called yield. So if they can guarantee that they will have a student coming to them, it increases their yield. And when their yield increases, it's more favorable for them, and they also tend to kind of rise in the rankings a little bit because they can brag and say, our yield is at such a rate. So ED is really beneficial to the colleges more so than to the student. And I know you can argue and say, but wait, you just said that the acceptance rates were higher. That is true, the acceptance rates were higher. But where it really dings students is that when you apply ED, what you're saying is that I'm going to come regardless, right? So you're saying, I don't care about financial aid, I don't care about how much money you're going to offer me, I don't care what you're putting on the table in terms of an offer. I'm going to come regardless. So it takes the benefit out of your hand and really puts it in theirs. Because if you say that, now you're giving up the right to sit down and compare financial aid packages when you apply to colleges in general and you get back offers from them. So ED is not something that you take lightly. In every high school, it's a process that the counselor is supposed to manage very closely. Here's the other disadvantage to applying ED. When you apply early decision, you can only apply to one college early decision, which means that, actually let me rephrase that. You can apply to any college that offers early decision. You can only apply to one of those. And those are usually private colleges. Most public schools and state schools do not have an ED process. But you can apply to one college ED, and you can apply to some of the other state schools early action if the college allows it. Now ED, the language is different from college to college. You really need to get on their website. But the reason I say you shouldn't take that process lightly is because, number one, from your perspective, you're giving up your ability to compare financial aid packages. And secondly, you really need to be 100% certain. Like, you need to be bleeding those school's colors, you need to be, I've got the pennant on the wall, I'm wearing the shirt, this is my school, this is it, right? And most students are really not at that place. Like, they don't have that allegiance to one school, when they're applying in the fall. Regular decision is just a regular deadline. Those regular decision deadlines usually come up in January. It's just a regular deadline, and if you apply regular decision, you hear back usually by March. Restrictive early action is a little bit like early action in that you're applying to a school and you're saying, I'm applying early, but there's no commitment. But there are limitations on where else you can apply. Restrictive early action applications you will find mostly for the Ivies. So if you're looking at Princeton, Harvard, Yale, all of them have restrictive early action deadlines. You don't usually find restrictive early action among most of the other schools. But it's non-binding, you're not making a commitment. Again, if you can get your application in time, then you hear back early. But also with restrictive early action, there are limitations on where else you can apply. And then there's something called a priority deadline. A priority deadline, if you see it on any college's admissions page, is just a scholarship deadline. So what they're saying is if you get your application in by, say, December 15th, then you automatically qualify for certain scholarships that the college is going to offer. So it's important to understand the terminology and understand what these deadlines mean, because that's really what you're working off of. So as a student, let's say I'm heading into the second semester of my junior year, I'm going to get ready to apply next semester. How I decide whether I apply early action, regular decision, what have you, is a function of a few different things. Number one, early action is a no-brainer. If you can get the application done by the deadline, you can get all your supporting documentation and go ahead and do it. There's absolutely no downside to it. You hear early. The only thing I will say is that UGA is the only college that I know of that evaluates early action applications different from regular decision. They are the only school that when you apply early action, they're only looking at numbers. They're looking at test scores, they're looking at GPA, and they're looking at the number of APs on your transcript. They're the only school that does that. Otherwise, most schools will evaluate early action just the same as regular decision. So in that case, there's really no thinking about it. If you can get it done early, do it. You have an acceptance under your belt by December. If you can't do it, then you would probably consider regular decision. Early decision we talked about, I mean, you really have to think through that. And regular decision, one thing to think about, there are some colleges that only offer ED or RD. And so if you don't want to do ED, you just generally have to apply in January. But if they offer early action versus regular decision, if you're the kind of student, let's just say you took the SAT, I don't know, you're taking it now. You get to June, you take it, and you're still not happy with your scores, right? SAT, ACT, whatever. If you choose to take it one more time in October before you submit your applications, then you would want to wait until the regular decision deadline because you have to have your scores back before you can apply. So, how to develop a good shortlist. And when I talk about a shortlist, all it means is that as a student, you have decided that you're going to apply to these 5 schools, these 8 schools, whatever that number is, right? And what should that shortlist look like? Now this is where you get into some really philosophical discussions about college and how you need to get yourself ready for college. So I put up a quote there because it's something I truly believe in my heart, and you haven't gotten to that point yet. I have a faithful student here who has come in on his Saturday, but when I talk to my students, I'm not saying anything different to them that I'm saying here. I see students preparing to apply for college a few different ways, right? So there are 2 general philosophies among just parents and students in general. One is you pick a school and you say, this is the school I want to go to. And then they work feverishly for 4 years saying, oh my gosh, I have to take all these APs, I've got to do all this extras, community service, I've got to get leadership, I've got to do this, that, and the other, regardless of whether that's the right thing for them. And then they develop a certain profile which really meets a certain school's needs. So that's the first philosophy. The other philosophy is, you know what, as a student, I'm going to do what's right for me at every grade level. I will keep my sanity in terms of how I'm going to choose classes and how many honors and APs and things I'm going to take. And then at the end of the 4 years, it is what it is. That's my profile. And if what I've done since freshman year is right for me, then whatever college I end up going to will be the right fit. And the second philosophy is something that I really push with my students. It's not easy. It's not easy. There's a lot of talk out there. There's a lot of peer pressure. How many APs did you take? I took 5. How many did you take? I took 8. There's all this chatter around students. It's a lot of pressure to put yourself under. So, when you're asking questions as to, okay, how many APs should my child take? My answer always is, you should take as many as you can handle and keep your sanity, get 7 hours of sleep, and stay engaged in community service and extracurriculars. I will tell you right now that, and for all the students that are here, just having stellar academics does not get you to the college of your choice. It just doesn't. Colleges look for well-rounded students. They look for students who not only present strong transcripts, but who are also doing a lot outside of the classroom. And when I say a lot outside of the classroom, you don't have to be the president of every club. You don't have to be the captain of the football team. Not everybody can be a captain. There's only one football team in the high school, you're only going to have one captain. But there's a lot of different ways to show leadership. So for example, I know there are kids in the room here who do a lot of work with either your temple or just at the Hindu temple, wherever else, right? That's who you are. That's your engagement outside of the classroom. And sometimes students really don't give themselves enough credit for what they do, but I think you should. And again, that goes to say that you should really do what's right for you. If you come from a certain family and there are certain values that are important to you, stay tuned to them and do whatever's right for you at that grade level, and it'll all fall into place. So keeping that philosophy in mind, every year when you pick your classes, don't do what your friends want you to do. Don't do what your friends are doing. Do what's right for you. If you're taking 6 classes a year and you can handle 4 APs and you can do really well, then take 4 APs. But if 4 APs are not your thing and you can do maybe 1 or 2, but you can do really well in them, and what I mean by really well is you don't have to take an AP and get an A to believe that you did well. Like, keep in mind the philosophy of the AP classes. AP classes are college level courses that are offered in high school, right? So when a college sees a student taking AP courses, they're looking to see, okay, was that student successful? Did they hold their own? Were they able to meet the requirements? Were they able to keep up with the workload? And so if you could get a solid B, and I'm talking in core counting language, so solid B would be anywhere, a B is an 80 to 89, but if you could end up with like an 84, 85 in an AP course, I call that successful, right? Because at the end of the day, I would much rather see a student take an AP course and get a B than take an honors level course and get an A. Because I know then that as a student, you pushed yourself and you know how to hold your own in a college environment. And that's what colleges are looking for. That's why they value APs, right? So just keep in mind that you're picking the right level of courses and you're engaging. It doesn't matter what that is. You know, I see girls participating in dance, whether it's classical Indian dance, ballet, jazz, tap, whatever it is. If you're part of a club, maybe you started a club at school because there just wasn't one there. I mean, that's leadership. If you're involved in your community, in your temple, you're giving back, you're going and doing things on weekends, all of that counts. And students should really keep track of everything they do, starting in 9th grade. But when you're putting a shortlist together, and when you're deciding what colleges should I apply to, there are a few things you really need to look at, and I'm talking to the students here, right? So students, keep in mind that when you go off to college, wherever you end up, is really going to be your home for the next 4 years, right? You're going to be living there on campus, that's your life. So there are a few things that you should look at when you're formulating your list saying, yeah, this is the right college for me, or no, this one's really not my cup of tea. The first is it should have a program of study that matches your interests, right? Whatever that is. Because at the end of the day, you're going to college to get a degree. That will ultimately get you a job. So it should offer the degree of your choice, whatever it is you're interested in. If you don't know yet, and you have no idea, and you're saying, okay, you know what, I'll figure it out, that's okay. Because keep in mind, you don't really need to declare a major in college until the end of your second year. So you do have a good year and a half in college to really solidify that decision. But, you know, at least make sure that they offer something of interest to you. If you have absolutely no clue, no worries. You know, look at some liberal arts schools, or look at, state schools. You know, state schools are a good choice in that regard because they will offer you practically everything. If you look at the way colleges are broken down in the US into different parts, you have the engineering schools and then you have what they call liberal arts schools. So under liberal arts, you will have everything from a pure science major to a philosophy major to an English major, just lots of different things, right? But that's generally how they break down. So if you go into the process, at least knowing whether you want engineering or you don't want engineering, that helps. Because if you're not the engineering type, you can say, okay, forget it, I'm not going to look at any of these schools. I'm going to focus on these. It just makes the narrowing down process a little bit easier. So first, the college needs to offer a program of study that you're interested in. Secondly, it needs to provide a style of instruction that matches with your learning abilities. And here's what I mean by that. So I've talked to a few students here. Some of you are on a block schedule, like you take 4 classes in the fall, 4 in the spring. Some of you are on a traditional schedule, where you take 6 classes a year, right? There's a big difference in how curriculum is delivered to you on those 2 schedules. If you're on a block schedule, it's coming at you fast and furious because an entire year's worth of curriculum now is condensed into 4 months. And yes, the periods are longer, they're 90 minutes long, but you're still covering an entire year's worth of curriculum in 4 months. So you need to be on top of things, you need to be walking out of the classroom every day fully understanding what the teacher is teaching, right? But in a traditional schedule, the pace of instruction is a little bit slower. Your periods are probably only 50 minutes long, but it's year-long, which means that, you know, it's a little bit slower. You don't have to be drinking out of the hydrant. I mean, it's coming at you at a reasonable pace. It's not any different in college. You know, you have colleges that are on the semester system, and then you have colleges that are on the quarter system. And it's exactly the same thing. If it's on a semester system, the pace of instruction is a little bit slower. You have the entire semester to digest the curriculum. If you're on a quarter system, you might be only doing 2 or 3 classes at a time, but it is so tightly packed, you really have to be on top of things. So these are the things that you want to keep in mind as you're formulating your list and as you're doing your research. Next, it has to provide a level of academic rigor that matches your abilities. And here's what I mean by that. If you are a student who's in the top 10% of your school, right? It means that you have certain academic abilities, which means that you could probably apply to any of the IVs, you could apply to any of the tier 1 schools, you know, the really selective schools, and you would be fine in that environment. But if you are not that type of student, and if maintaining your grades, like if you are a middle of the road student, and if you really do have to work for your grades, There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But you want to keep that in mind when you're selecting a college. Because it's not just about getting in. It's about getting in and then doing well over the next 4 years, right? I mean, that's what's going to determine whether you get your job, whether you get your foot in the door with the company, whether you're really able to succeed in life. So here's how you can gauge that. If you're looking at colleges that have anywhere, I'd say less than a 25% acceptance rate, those are really, really selective. So I'll give you an example. Harvard has, I think last year, they were accepting students at the rate of 6%. Similarly, Georgia Tech is actually not getting any better. It's actually getting worse every year. It's getting more competitive. Georgia Tech, this year's early action round, they accepted 28% of students. They're pretty selective too. So, it gives you a sense for how hard a school is not only to get into, but how hard it's going to be for you when you get there. Now, you have other schools. So, for example, if you look at Virginia Commonwealth, VCU is a great school. They accept students. Their acceptance rate is 75%. So now there's a big difference there. So chances are, if you're a middle-of-the-road student, you will thrive at a school like VCU because everybody else is kind of similar to you. You don't walk in there feeling completely overwhelmed. So that's something that students really need to pay attention to when you're starting to formulate that shortlist. And the last thing is, like I said, college is going to be your home for the next 4 years, right? So you need to feel comfortable. You need to feel like when you get on campus, you should walk around and say, yeah, I can see myself here. I can see myself being here for the next 4 years. And what that means is that, keep in mind, you're in class for how many ever days in the week, right? But what do you do outside of the class, outside of classroom time? So if you go to a school like UGA, it would help to be a big football fan because the football culture at UGA is huge. I mean, in the fall, it consumes everyone. I mean, that's what they do. So if you're the kind of child who absolutely hates football, and now on Saturdays, Fridays, everybody's tailgating, everybody's off to the football game, and you really don't care for that, what are you going to do? I'm sure you find other things, and I'm sure that every student at UGA doesn't like football, but you know what I mean, right? You need to be able to plug in to the culture in college. So you need to think about that. What are you going to do on a Friday evening? Like, do they offer clubs that interest you? Is there good diversity? If diversity is important to you, you need to look at that. Whom am I going to hang out with on a Friday evening? So these are the things you really need to think about when you're putting your shortlist together. So in that regard, I have a website down there. It's called bigfuture.collegeboard.org. This Big Future website is part of College Board that actually runs the SATs, and there's a lot of great information on there. There are actually tools that you can use where you say, okay, there are about 4,000 colleges out there. How do I narrow it down and find a list that's good for me? And they have ways to do that on there, so please check out that website. So let's talk about the application itself and how do you know where to find the application? How do you work through the application? What's it called? So there are one of 3 applications that you can use when you're applying to college. There's something called a Common App. It's called a Common Application, and the website is www.commonapp.org. And that number has actually changed. Common App is used, it's one common application that's used by over 700 schools. So, for example, Georgia Tech, Emory, University of Florida, let's see, God, I just said VCU. These are all Common App schools, right? So in essence, what I could do as a student is I could complete the common application once, and as long as I pay the application fees, I could apply to 10 schools. And so it has made applying to college a lot easier for students. Now there's also the downside to that, because now students are saying, hey, I can apply to 10 schools, so I'm just going to go ahead and submit applications. And now there are ramifications for admissions and everything else. But from a student perspective, the Common App is a great thing, because you don't have to redo your application 10 different times if you're applying to 10 different schools. Even though multiple schools might use the Common App, there is a differentiation in the way they use it. So the way it works is the application is standard for all schools, right? But where they differentiate themselves is usually with respect to the essay. Everybody knows that you have to write an essay for college. It's part of the application. That's a really big deal. So there are standard essays that students have to write for all schools. It doesn't matter. If they're Common App, you have to write that essay. But some schools will distinguish themselves in offering supplemental essays to students. So for example, Emory does that, Georgia Tech does that. So where you have to write the standard essay, but there are also supplemental essay prompts where you have to answer questions specific to the college. So one of Georgia Tech's standard supplemental prompts is, why Georgia Tech? Why are you coming to Georgia Tech? Why do you want to apply to Georgia Tech? With Emory, I'm sure it's something specific. If you look at U Chicago's supplement prompts, they're the most bizarre things I've ever seen. Very vague questions, and you can answer it any way you want to answer it. But that should also give you a sense for what kind of school that is. I mean, if they're asking pretty straightforward questions, it's pretty straightforward. If they're asking you really bizarre questions, then you know that they're not looking for your average student who just focuses on classes and is done. They're looking for a different level of thinking. But there's the Common App. Then there's also something called the Universal College Application. This is fairly new. I think it opened up in 2016, and I don't know of too many schools in the area that are using it, but it is another application that kind of competes with Common App. The Universal College Application offers a few more features that the Common App does not. So, students can adopt the Universal College Application starting in 9th grade. There's something called a virtual locker. You can upload writing samples. You can share it with admissions reps from different colleges. They can look at your work and give you feedback. I mean, there's a lot more to that. But it isn't as popular as the Common App for sure. And then beyond that, there's what we call the in-house application. There are several colleges that have their own applications that has nothing to do with Common App or the Universal Application. UGA is one of those schools. UGA has its own application, so you are not going to find that application anywhere else except on UGA's site. So if you're looking to apply to UGA, you have to use their own application. So those are the 3 types. So depending on your short list of schools, once you get your list of schools together and you're ready and you know where you want to apply, you have to determine whether they're Common App, non-Common App, do they have their own application, how do I apply? And then you have to basically work on that application and submit it. So let's talk about supporting documentation a little bit. Whenever you're ready to apply to college, there are documents that need to be sent to the college, and they break down into 2 broad buckets, I would say. There is one piece that students are supposed to do. So there's a whole bunch of things that you as the student need to submit to the college. And then there's what we call supporting documentation, which usually comes from the school. So it might be your job, just depending on whatever high school you go to. I'm sure there's an internal process where if you want to request those documents, you have to do something. But ultimately, it's the high school's job to send those documents out, right? So let's talk about what you need to do as a student. So your job when you're applying to colleges, you have to submit the application. That, of course, is yours to do. You have to pay the application fee. That's, again, yours to do. And then you have to submit your test scores. So your SAT, ACT, whatever that is, you have to order it directly from College Board or from ACT, and you have to send it to the school. It shouldn't touch anybody else's hands along the way, because then it loses its legitimacy. So that is yours to do, and I think that's pretty much it. It's test scores and the application and the fees, right? So that's the student's piece. Now the high school's piece is a little bit different. Anytime a student submits an application to college, the high school will submit something called a school profile. Okay? It is usually a 2 or 3 page document. It talks about the high school. It says, okay, here we are, here's our school, here's where we're located, we're public, we're private, we have so many students here, we offer so many APs, here's what the average curriculum looks like. It's basically giving any admissions officer who knows nothing